Greetings, Stuart.
Hello, Jill.
Pretty nice day so far. We've been hanging out and getting things together.
Yeah, it's been a beautiful couple days, really.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm super excited to have James Yskamp with us, who I've been connected with, it might be almost 10 years now. Super supportive, an attorney with Earthjustice. And yeah, there's several topics that we want to discuss with him, but I'm just going to say welcome, James.
Yeah, so my name is James Yskamp. I'm a senior attorney at Earthjustice. I've been practicing environmental law since 2014. So been at a few different places, practicing environmental law on what we call like the public interest side of it. So yeah, I currently live and work out of Akron, Ohio.
And so our history was you were helping me when I still had my home with compressor station issues that I was dealing with. But also, I think the first time I met you was a meeting after the Eisenbarth well pad explosion. And so, yeah, he's been boots on the ground kind of offering support to impacted community members for a long time. So I just want to say first, really appreciate your support all these years and so much respect for all the contributions you continue to make. So thank you, James.
Right back at you, Jill. You've been on the ground doing more work than I have on the ground, certainly. So you've been really vital to getting some protections in place. It's hard where we work, but yeah, so thanks.
And can I just ask about your background a little bit more about what brought you into environmental law? And you said you called it but did you say the public-facing side or
public interest?
Public interest.
Yes.
Public interest, yeah.
So what's that mean?
I kind of moved around a lot as a kid. I'm sorry to start all the way back here, but that's just where it happened. And we settled in a place called Mansfield, Pennsylvania. It's in Tioga County, Pennsylvania. And it was one of the first places where the fracking boom really started. So I remember these small oil and gas companies coming in around like 2007, 2008, that early, and signing people up with leases. And then what would happen in the future is they would just sell off all this leased land to like the bigger companies that would come in and do the fracking. But those leases were a really raw deal for the landowners. And then, a few years later, the fracking began, and I just saw this really nice rural town in Pennsylvania. Like, one of the good parts about living in a nice rural town is like the air is nice, the views are nice, the traffic is non-existent. That all changed in the fracking boom. So I saw this rural town get pretty ravaged. So I'm sure you all know because you've done these like tours around Southeast Ohio, but it's very similar pretty much in all the shale fields where this boom has occurred. But there are frac pads everywhere. Most of these roads are dirt roads, and they can't handle the kind of truck traffic that occurs, so it ruins the roads. All of a sudden, there is a lot of traffic. You get stuck behind one of these giant trucks, and you're going like 20 miles an hour now. And then as time went on, there was a lot of complaints about water contamination, the air, you would get like these fumes in the air. The problems with runoff would dirty the rivers and the streams. And it just completely changed the makeup of the town. And then one thing that's not talked about too often in the environmental community is the social change that occurs. So you bring in, as much as they talk about local jobs, they also bring in, like in this town of maybe 2,500 people, 10,000 men to this town. And that created a number of problems eventually. So before the fracking boom, I don't remember like a huge drug problem in the area. And with the fracking boom, like with these people and the money that comes in, there was all kinds of a wave of drug addictions, these things called bath salts, and then opioid addiction, and then prostitution as well, and human trafficking. Like these little like Mayberry town all of a sudden saw all these problems, over time. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer at some point after graduating college. I did work for a little bit, but I did want to go to law school. I had a friend that went. It was very encouraging. And I worked as a paralegal for about a year. And I thought, I can go to law school. I can learn torts and think about like all the potential trespass actions that have occurred, all the water contamination stuff. I thought of that as like tort action, contracts, try to get all these people out of these bad leases that they no longer want to be in. And there really wasn't good representation for people. So if you think about what happens when the frack boom occurs, is the local attorneys get contracted by the gas companies to do the title work, right? So the landmen come in, they bring the title documents to the attorneys, they review them and sign off on them or whatever. But they're contracted to do the title work. Maybe they're retained by gas companies for other work. But what essentially happens is they're conflicted out of representing people who come to them with a lease issue, right? Yeah. So people just didn't get good representation. I thought, I can come and provide that. So I go to law school, I'm working my way through it, and I really wanted to focus on real world experience. And there's clinics at the law school. One of the clinics is the environmental law clinic. And they still have the environmental law clinic at the University of Pittsburgh. I don't know exactly what it is today, but back then it was a lot of litigation. You could get really good experience there. But I went to the clinic and I saw like there are all these laws. There's like these state agencies that run these laws, like these environmental laws that were supposed to be applying, but I never saw any of it when I was in my hometown. And I never saw the Pennsylvania DEP, and they were never out at these sites. But that's when I realized, like, oh, this is it. This is what I want to do. I want to use these environmental laws, be an environmental attorney, which I didn't really know was even a thing at the time. So that's really how I got into it. And yeah, my first job was at the time, it was a startup law firm called Fair Shake Environmental Legal Services. That's where I met Jill, actually. They do really great work representing individuals, small community groups, to even, they'll represent big organizations. And they'll take on anything if it touches environmental law. And that can be, when I say environmental law, one way to think about it is like the major environmental statutes, but it can also be like local zoning. It can just be, again, trespass from water contamination, something like that. So that's how I got into it.
And you helped me with filing an intent to sue for the, issues we were having with the compressor station. And that work was done pro bono, which means I didn't have to pay. And so talk about an incredible service, to impacted community members. Part of my goal has been to make it known how fracking equals cracking to make plastic, and it's petrochemicals, right? Which turns into plastic. And so I guess it was early on when we heard about the original petrochemical build out in the region, which is what, like 8, 9, 10 years ago. There was a facility in West Virginia called West Virginia Methanol that we were concerned about, and began monitoring. Alex Cole and Yuri Gorby and I installed air monitors in homes near that facility to try to gather a baseline of what the air quality was before the facility was built. And then, they were issued permits, right? And then nothing's happened. And I just heard that potentially the land's up for sale. And so I guess I'd like to talk, and this kind of gets into the permitting and that they're permitted as, this would have been permitted as a minor source. And so can you just go into that a little bit? Like help me and help folks understand why these minor source permits are a problem and what that even really means.
Yeah, so I'll start a little bit with the Clean Air Act is a kind of a monster statute in that there's a lot to it. And I think of it like quantum physics a little bit in that when you ask a quantum physicist if they understand like quantum mechanics, they'll tell you that if anyone tells you they do, they don't really understand, right? Clean Air Act is similar in that nobody, I feel like, understands all of it, but people specialize in pieces of it. So one piece of the Clean Air Act is just regulating stationary sources of emission. So all these plants that emit pollutants are stationary sources of pollution, and they should all be regulated under the Clean Air Act. And that's broken down between major sources and what are sometimes called area sources, sometimes called minor sources. And major sources, essentially, you emit a certain level of pollutants, you are a major source. If you fall even 1 ton per year below that level, you're a minor source. So West Virginia methanol, and we saw these proposed more than just West Virginia methanol, but when you talk about the petrochemical build out, it's been proposed in a number of different ways. One was all these giant cracker plants. I'm sure you remember that. And the one that got built was Shell in Beaver County, PA. But there was a bunch of proposals for them, including PTTG, if you remember, that thankfully did not come to fruition. But those are all easily major sources. There's no way they could convince an agency that they don't. They're just gigantic projects. So another thing, though, that was happening shortly after that was there was these proposals for what they call modular chemical plants. And they're smaller, but they would build like a number of them, like 3 or 4. And each of them, they would propose to be under major source limits. But what we found, and we had expert support for this, is those calculations were very questionable, and they were like right under major source limits. But the one thing that's difficult in permitting, so the agencies, in this case, the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, so the agency gets a permit application that proposes a minor source, and they issue a draft permit for a minor source. And the difficulty is proving something that happens in the future is going to have emissions above, these levels. So we could really pick apart how they did it, even propose that it's likely to be higher, but it's a difficult thing to prove that they will be higher.
But that's when you get in the expert witnesses, and you did go through that process with the West Virginia methanol draft permits.
We were involved in the comment process, and that's where we submitted an expert report. And, West Virginia DP did make some changes based on that report as far as to some of the requirements in the permit, but they were still permitted as a minor source. And the reason that matters, so major source permitting has strict and, in a lot of cases, continuous monitoring of the emissions. And there are basically four regulations that require monitoring for every permit limit and reporting for every permit limit in order to determine compliance. And there's a lot of fights over how much monitoring is needed to determine compliance, but at least there's a good amount, and at least those fights can happen even at the major source level. And you also have EPA oversight. So every time there's a renewal, you can petition EPA based on the renewal. And every limit is federally enforceable, so EPA can enforce it. Even citizens can enforce those provisions. Minor sources is just a totally different story. So the EPA doesn't really get involved at all with minor sources. It's really up to the state how they're regulated, how much limits are in them. In some cases, the Clean Air Act regulates almost every stationary source of emissions. So in some cases, that's justified, right? Maybe you need a permit, but you don't need to continuously monitor something that only has a few tons per year of pollutants. But the major source thresholds are actually pretty high, especially for like hazardous air pollutants and toxic pollutants. And so you can be emitting even a toxic level of these very dangerous pollutants, but you have like no monitoring for it. With West Virginia methanol, there was certainly pollutants of concern. We're seeing this a lot with these, what are being called chemical recycling facilities, where they're emitting things like dioxins and furans and vinyl chloride and things like that. And in some cases, without even a limit for those pollutants. We're talking about pollutants that are not safe at any level. The minor source permitting, it just creates it's a real blind spot in the Clean Air Act, where Congress, for whatever reason, has never got around to addressing, especially these chemical facilities that maybe they don't emit 100 tons of a certain pollutant a year to get within the Title V and the major source limits to require a major source permit. But that doesn't mean they're not emitting concerning levels of pollutants. And to not at least limit and then monitor those is a real gap in Clean Air Act permitting.
Not to mention, if you have a situation where you have multiple minor sources all in the same community, then you're essentially over the threshold for a major source, but it's just not per individual permit. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And that's something that industry has been doing a lot. And whether it's legal challenges or agencies just making what I would consider bad regulations to allow this kind of permitting where you break things up. But it's really one industry in one area. And that's kind of what we were seeing with the proposed like modular chemical plant build out, where it's like you have these smaller plants that would add up easily to a major source. Just two of them would be way over major source thresholds. But they're able to be permitted as minor sources and avoid a lot of regulation because of that.
And not regulation, but also, just the monitoring and determining if they're in compliance or not. I mean, that is so concerning.
Yeah, so that's a situation that sounds like it could actually, well, I mean, what you just described sounds more dangerous potentially than a major source.
Right?
Because if you have two minor sources that are just under the threshold, putting them together, they're far beyond the threshold, but there's no monitoring involved.
Or very little monitoring, like a yearly or bi-yearly stack test, something like that.
This is like, we're talking about like places like pyrolysis, and like what kind of facilities are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's a big one right now. So these pyrolysis gasification facilities. So these facilities, and just to explain what they are, so they are I would say waste disposal facilities, but the proposal is that they're actually recycling waste, and we're seeing these be used now to kind of as solutions to the plastic waste problem. So we're seeing a lot of plastic pyrolysis facilities be proposed and starting to be built. But this is not really a new technology. It's just being spun as like a new solution to this growing plastic problem. And what pyrolysis does is it heats the plastic or the tires or whatever the waste is. It raises the temperature anywhere from like 400 to like 750 degrees in one chamber. And then that's going to basically melt this stuff down into an oil or a gas, I should say. And then there's a second chamber where that gas goes and it's burned off. In some cases, like the char is burned in that second chamber. And then the claim is that this product can then either be used as fuel or be broken down even further to be made back into new plastics. So they call this chemical recycling, is what they call it. And they say, I say they, just these facilities and the industries behind them claim that there's no burning occurring or combustion because they don't let oxygen into that first chamber. But that's really not true, and even EPA has never found that to be true. So they've always found that these facilities are what are called solid waste incinerators under the Clean Air Act. And so I should probably talk about that just to understand like how they should be regulated.
Yes, but also just to make a very clear, bold statement, it's a false solution, and it's not a cure to the plastic crisis in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, in my opinion, my personal opinion, it is burning plastic. Unless you think burning the plastic is the solution to the plastic problem. So basically, let's just throw it all in incinerators. Then no, it is a false solution. It is not recycling, in my opinion, at all. You're just burning plastic.
And it's a minor source, which means the states are in charge of regulating, which means it's going to be a horrible toxic emitter.
Well, let's talk about that. So, like I said, the Clean Air Act has this gap between major source and minor source, and we talked about almost all chemical facilities that would qualify as a minor source are emitting toxic pollutants that are going probably unregulated because it's a minor source. It's just a gap in the Clean Air Act. You have these dangerous emissions, but the Clean Air Act just didn't account for that kind of thing. But that's not true for incinerators.
Okay.
So there is a part of the Clean Air Act. So Congress went in and amended it for incinerators because small incinerators were burning all this trash, including plastic and everything else, and emitting cancer-causing pollutants like dioxin and furans, and going pretty unregulated because of this gap in the Clean Air Act. So they created what is Section 129 of the Clean Air Act, and it regulates solid waste incinerators. So if you send solid or municipal waste to be burned at pretty much any size incinerator, there are different regulations for each one, but you're pretty strictly regulated. So Congress did address this gap for burning waste. They did address it. Not for these other chemical facilities like the methanol production. Before burning waste, they did address it. And all of these facilities are each trying to find different ways to get out of being regulated under 129, because it is quite a bit of monitoring, reporting. You have to do a siting analysis up front to determine if it's even safe for this community to have this here. And you need, no matter what size you are, you need a Title V permit. So you need that major source permit, no matter what size you are. And there is federal oversight. So that is one area where Congress saw a gap. They came in and tried to fix it. And these facilities are, and again, there aren't many of them, but they're really trying to get around that gap and not be regulated under Section 129.
I want to bring up Altera because are they trying to weasel their way and try to get permitted as a minor source, or what? Or tell me what's happening there, because I'm just, and that's in Akron. It's in your community, right?
Yeah, so it's not just Altera, but they have been operating. So Altera has been operating in some capacity since around 2021.
As a major source or a minor source?
As a minor source. So this, like I said, they've been operating at some capacity since 2021. I think there's only been 2 or 3 stack tests total done for this facility. Each one did show emissions such as vinyl chloride. One of the stack tests was for dioxins, and there was a reading for dioxins. There's a range of toxic pollutants that were found in the emissions of the facility. And yeah, they're regulated as a minor source, so there's very little monitoring and reporting. compliance is all done through just let's make sure your emissions controls are working, but we're not really seeing what's coming out of the stack. And they have never, that would be different if they were regulated under Section 129. There's a number of toxic pollutants that they need to regularly monitor for. Again, they never did the siting analysis that's required under there. They would need that major source permit. There is federal oversight. And so, no, they've never been regulated under Section 129. And there are a couple of very limited exemptions in 129. And their permit is up for renewal, and we're seeing one of the exemptions now in the permit that is up for renewal. So one of the exemptions is, they call it plastic or rubber recycling facilities. And they don't have to comply with the municipal waste combustions, but there's a lot of requirements to meet that exemption that, as far as we can tell, they haven't been doing any of like the record keeping for that exemption. It's not clear that they make the right kind of product to be able to meet that exemption. One requirement for that exemption is, so they have to keep track of the plastic that they process at the facility, so all the plastic that goes through it, and the product they make has to be a feedstock used for a chemical facility or petroleum refinery, and they have to keep weight of that product. And the weight of the product has to be greater than 70% of the plastic that they're processing. So that seems like it would be hard to do if they melt down this waste, they create char and all this stuff. But that's how they're currently trying to get around Section 129. And all these facilities seem to be using all kinds of different ways to try to do it.
But how did they do it in the beginning with that exemption, or they just said, we're not going to be burning any plastic, we're a recycling facility, and they just got away with it? Or
that is a question that we have not been able to get answered, is why wasn't Section 129 applying this whole time? I mean, I've seen their old permits. I've never seen this exemption in there or these record keeping requirements. So yeah, it doesn't appear that they've been qualifying for it up till now.
One of the ways that I've read that these facilities can get around it is they just classify themselves in the framework of different industries. So they'll call themselves manufacturing, or they'll call themselves, recycling. And so you're saying that because, does it have to do with the fact that they're not combusting? Is that kind of what allows them to go into these different avenues?
But you are saying they say that, but they are, in fact, right?
I think it's pretty clear that they're combusting. So let's talk about the combustion issue for a second. So first of all, the claim is made that the pyrolysis process doesn't involve combustion. So they shouldn't be regulated under 129. Couple of problems there. One, just legally, EPA has defined it as combustion, essentially. So they say these pyrolysis facilities are small municipal waste combustion units. That's right in the regulation. So just legally, it doesn't appear to be a good case for them. And then factually, combustion at least occurs, if you think about it. So there's the pyrolysis chamber where the plastic is kind of melted down. Then the gas is sent to be burned off, combusted in the next chamber. That gas is the plastic waste. They just converted it to gas. So it is the waste, right? So but just factually, there has to be combustion. And then just also factually, a lot of this plastic coming in contains oxygen. So there's probably combustion in the pyrolysis chamber at most of these facilities. So it's just a bad argument legally and factually. I get why they want to say it. It's bad optics to burn plastic in a community and say that you're green, right? They are trying to greenwash with this. but legally and factually, that shouldn't get them around Section 129. I think it has in some cases. I saw an application for a facility where they were acting like this was a brand new technology it's an experimental technology that they're trying to do this pilot project. But all it was pyrolysis. They're just heating it in a chamber without oxygen. Like when you read the description, that's what it is. So that's one way they're trying to get around it. And then they're trying to use these really limited exemptions to get around it as well.
So does it come down to corruption, lobbyists? I mean, what is going on? I mean, what's your professional opinion of why this is being allowed to happen?
Well, I think that these facilities operate at very thin margins, and being regulated under Section 129 would really increase the cost. It also would create a social stigma because they would be incinerators. I mean, they don't like being called incinerators. They claim that's defamation. But if they just factually, they fall into the incineration part of the Clean Air Act. So I think it's fair to call them incinerators. So yeah, I think they need a solution to the plastic waste problem. This has been touted as a solution, and it doesn't work if they can't operate cheaply, and it doesn't work if it's not, a solution, if it's burning plastic waste, right? So that's why I think they're fighting so hard to not be properly regulated.
Well, also, there's got to be, and I'm just guessing here, but there's got to be some subsidy advantages if they're considered like a green technology.
Yeah.
And I imagine that that's part of the equation as well.
Yeah, and their messaging has worked. So we see these facilities getting like state and local subsidies. Like in some cases, their rent is either free or just like $1, right? And like the Altera facility was touted by the local Democratic congressional representative as being like this clean facility, and I just don't think the education was done at the time. And even the language that's used, even among green groups, the chemical recycling language is used, and that's their language. And that's the thing about all these new build outs, all these new like solutions from these industries. Like it's hard to get in front of them. Like it's hard not to be on the defense. Like by the time the build outs start happening, like they've been planning it, and it's up to them when the information gets released.
And the propaganda and the greenwashing has had its effect. And so the local officials and state or whatever, it's like, oh yes, let's jump on board here. And that's where
Well, Altera was permitted in the original permit was like 2015. I mean, I work in this space. We weren't even talking about these facilities. Like we just didn't know it was happening, right? Or really what it was. In our region, I mean, I think there were people at Earthjustice who have been working on it. I wasn't there at the time. But yeah, it's just hard to again, there's already so much to that in the Ohio River Valley region, I'll speak for. There's always so much going on. There's so much that we are already burdened with that when the new thing comes, it's easy to miss it. It's easy for it to be established by the time you get around to fighting it.
Yeah, I have a lot of experience with that. In my own area with a project that is a quote unquote green project. And what I've learned from that experience has been that it seems very intentional that the company that wanted to build out this project was, they got as much legwork as possible done before anyone in the community knew what was going on.
Legwork with the local officials and the state.
Signing leases, getting officials on board. And then it was only through sort of like this slow leak of rumors that the general public was like, hey, wait, what's happening here?
Yeah.
And then we started going to town hall meetings, and it's so much harder to push back against a project when it's got momentum.
Yep.
And I wonder if that's... I'm saying that as a citizen, but from an attorney's perspective, does that follow legally? Like, is it just a lot harder to address these things when there's momentum built behind them?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the laws are what they are, the legal arguments are going to be what they be, but often when there's momentum behind them, the laws change and make it more difficult to fight. And that's true for these. So the last Trump administration, EPA proposed a rulemaking that would remove pyrolysis from Section 129 regulations. This would be done by rule. There's a statute, so Congress has considered a statute that would exempt them, which would even be more concerning from a legal fight perspective. And so, and to your point earlier, there has been a lot of momentum behind these facilities in particular in these states. So the build out is really, it looks like typical, like Ohio River Valley is getting the burden of these pyrolysis facilities and the Gulf South, right? Like we see that all the time. These same communities bear the burdens from these industries. But you saw the momentum right away. This West Virginia and Ohio passed laws that say this is not disposal of waste. This is either manufacturing or recycling. And if it wasn't for the federal laws that say that just hasn't happened at the federal level. So plastic is waste, and burning it qualifies you as an incinerator, right? So if it wasn't for those federal laws, those state laws would work. It would be a workaround. So if those, as far as this momentum, if this gets momentum at the federal level again, these could be like legitimately exempted from both state and federal laws. And without that federal floor, the states are free to say, this is manufacturing, this is recycling.
And so I'm thinking about the community in Akron, and is it people over polymers? Are they actively fighting and trying to do something about Altera?
Yeah, so Altera has a draft permit issued by Ohio EPA that means that it's in a comment period. So the public has until June 4th to comment on the draft permit. People Over Polymers is kind of organizing around this comment period to get people out to share their concerns, to be informed about what the potential emissions are from the facility. So yeah, I think other like Big Love Network is also helping with that. It's another local organization. So yeah, I think that they would encourage people to submit written comments if they can. I think the public meeting where you can comment at, and there's supposed to be an informational presentation by Ohio EPA as well, is May 26th. So they'd like to get people out to that as well.
Do you know where that is?
We can find out and put it in the show notes for this episode.
Is there anything else, people who are concerned can do? Or, it just seems like, there's a lot of folks from a lot of organizations in the tri-state and the Gulf South, like working on these issues. But I guess what I'm wondering, is progress being made, or are you encouraged? How are you feeling about, I'm going to call it a battle because it is.
There's there's people working on it. People are on top of it, including, us with a few of these facilities in our region. There's people working at the federal level to fight if another rulemaking comes out. So I'm encouraged that in a lot of ways, the awareness is there, at least in the environmental and legal community. I think one thing I would encourage people to do is just like be educated about it, and tell if one of these is coming to your community, help educate other people about it. Cause like this facility in Akron, like I said, there was never, if you look at what like the local congressperson said, what's on the company website, what the city of Akron itself has said about it, there's no mention of emissions. There's no mention of burning anything, certainly. It's just touted as this great solution. So if that was more in the public awareness, that would be great. But I am encouraged that, from legal perspective, we're aware of the issues. I think a lot of groups like yours, like this, this local grassroots group, People Over Polymers. A lot of the groups that we work with are aware and fighting these facilities, or at least asking them to be regulated properly. If you think about it, that's all we're asking. Just be regulated under the act, the part of the act that regulates facilities that combust waste. That's it. That's all we're asking. What is frightening, though, is that, the current administration is scary. They've already tried to exempt these by rule. Congress, we're worried about them trying to push that bill through that would exempt them as well. So I'm encouraged that there's a lot of fighters. I feel like there's as many or more than as there ever has been since I've started doing this work. But we're really up against it, right? As far as the states that we work in, and now the federal, the federal outlook is another thing that is pretty grim that we have to stay on top of and probably fight whatever comes from them as well.
I want to shift a little bit and go back to West Virginia, because you are licensed in West Virginia, correct? So you're familiar and we've been working with you about the West Virginia methanol from the beginning. But what I want people to understand, and I need to know more, is what's the deal with the permitting in West Virginia, like with West Virginia methanol? Like, supposedly the land's for sale, but with these permits, they never expire. And is that, please tell me a little bit about what's so concerning about the permitting in West Virginia for these facilities like West Virginia methanol.
It's another unfortunate consequence of being permitted as a minor source. So regulation of minor sources, like I said, is really up to the state. West Virginia, when they issue a minor source permit, there's no automatic expiration. So most permits that we work with, you may even recall this from the injection well, the solution mining permits for the PTTG plant. Most permits you need to construct by this date or your permit expires. So for West Virginia, for minor sources of air pollution, their permit never expires. It's really up to the agency. There's a process they can do after 6 months, just 6 months. After 6 months without construction, they can start the process of revoking the permit. They basically say, hey, no construction has occurred. Either justify that or start construction, or we're going to pull your permit. The thing is that we just never see them do that. And so like the Adams Fork ammonia facility, that was a facility that was not an ammonia facility originally permitted. And it was permitted in 2011 originally.
Really?
Totally different. So that wasn't even a new permit application. That was a permit modification application, which is a little easier to get than a totally new permit. And so, yeah, with West Virginia methanol, that was one of the 2021, March of 2021, maybe April or May of 2021, that was permitted. Never started construction, and they just have this permit out there. And I don't know what the land situation is exactly, but I imagine a buyer's, if they were going to buy the land, they might be a turnoff that there's this methanol plant has a permit to build this modular methanol facility on their land. So,
but is that something like, it'd be great to check that facility off our list, of something to be concerned about, which, the PTTG cracker plant, we kind of have checked it off, but it's still lingering. And depending on who you're listening to, some people might say, oh, there's still a chance that's going to happen here locally. But like, is there something that we could do with West
unless
Virginia?
their permits can expire, right? Because they're regulated as a major source. So yeah, that is a major problem. So there's always this threat that it could start construction tomorrow. And one of the big problems with that is these laws and regulations under the Clean Air Act. And it's true for West Virginia methanol. There are some what are called, best available technology requirements, or just general, when new technology advances for controlling the emissions or preventing leaks, things like that, those requirements get updated. And they could just build their facility with their current permit without including those updates if their permit never expires. So aside from just the fact that it could always just start building.
So they get locked into wherever the regulations were when the permit was written?
Yeah, they just have to comply with their permit. And then the permit can then, the agency can step in and modify, especially when it renews. But these things never, there's no requirement for renewal. They just never expire. So yeah, it's just a major flaw in that minor source permitting in West Virginia for sure.
So then is there some action we could take with the help of Earthjustice? Like, could we petition West Virginia DEP to like, hey, we want this permit revoked. We want it done. It's not, I mean, is that realistic? Is that something that we could do? And would that be fruitful potentially?
I think folks could always, again, it's totally discretionary from West Virginia DEP. So I don't know of like a legal action you could take, but I think it couldn't hurt to ask. And I don't, the local development authority, why wouldn't they want to see the permit? Like what the West Virginia DEP does is they issue basically a letter that says either justify not constructing or tell us how you have constructed, or we could revoke your permit. Like even the local development authority that wanted this project should want that because it makes the company actually do what it says it's going to do, build and create jobs, right? Or if they're not going to do it, they should know that so that they can get something else in there that will hopefully create jobs. So I don't think it's just like groups like yours or even local residents, but these development authorities that are supposed to promote business should want these permits to expire. So they're not just like taking up space.
Right. Like with the PTTG, which is, Jobs Ohio spent $70 million and they're still waiting on PTTG 8-9 years later to build the facility when they could have, imagine what could have been built on that facility site. So,
I mean, I think part of the issue is just, I think local politicians, local leaders, they like to tout projects either during elections or for the next election, and they kind of bank on the short-term memory of people. So it's kind of like, hey, look at this shiny new project I got done. And then when it doesn't happen, it's like, it's okay because everyone's moved on to the next thing. And I just think that that's not necessarily a comment on the legality of it, but just like the politics of it.
Which is important for the work though, because we get criticized in the groups that I've represented, the people I've represented. I think it's an unfair criticism, but the criticism is, oh, you're always just saying no. Like you don't want this, you don't want that. Well, what are you going to say yes to? Like even with these pyrolysis facilities, it's like, oh, no to this plastic solution too, right? What is it? And that's a big thing with these, like the local politicians. I just feel like, first of all, it shouldn't really be on us. Like we want sustainable economic development, and politicians just seem to be like one track minded, at least in this region. Like we need industry, we need the next industry thing. And I think Orvie's done some research on this. There's a researcher at the University of Akron that's done good work on it. Like there are really good economic models and successful ones that just don't rely on industry. It's not about like, let's be attractive to the next big industrial thing. Like PTTG's along the river, like this like 50-acre plot. What if that was a remediated green space? Like imagine people want to live there or recreate there. And that's the other thing. You want to create an economic development model where people want to live, not travel in to work.
Yeah, it's also a false choice, right? It's like this false dichotomy that people create where it's like, oh, you just don't want any industry. And it's like, well, no, but there's different ways to go about that industry. There's, we've been talking this whole time about how these plants that emit toxic chemicals have found ways to get around regulations. And if you just applied those regulations, it would be a better way to do it. I'm not saying that I'm necessarily supportive of it, but it's a false choice to say that just because you're arguing for stronger regulations or stronger protections automatically means you want it all shut down. It's not the same.
Yeah, and even the word industry is just too broad. So I don't mean like they just seem to like want to get the next cracker plant, right? Or the next, like these big polluting industries. There's plenty of industries that don't pollute. I know that there was a plant somewhere near Pittsburgh. I think it was a cracker plant. But it was pretty well hated in the community. Nobody wanted to live around it. And it shut down and became a brewery. Now there's concerts there all the time. And it's they created this nice big green space, just a place where it's something you want to live around, and that has created jobs, and it's upped the real estate value around it as well. I just think they're just so, I say so narrow-minded. A lot of our local politicians are frankly so tied to the oil and gas industry that it goes beyond narrow-mindedness in a lot of cases. But I would encourage people to press their local leaders on what they're trying to attract to their communities. Like, well, what have you done to attract anything else? What else have you looked at besides, this chemical plant that's going to create 40 jobs or something?
And I'm speaking about communities and the Akron community, which, an hour and a half from here. But I kind of feel like familiar, but I should have known, but didn't know about this pyrolysis facility there until, I don't know, a year or two ago. But I guess one thing, where is it? Is it literally like right in a neighborhood? Is it at the edge of the city? Where is it? And do you think it's once again just a handful of small group of people who actually know what it is and what the issues and concerns are? I would just like to know a little bit more about, because we're here sitting in Barnesville. It's a small town, 5,000. So kind of the news travels fast a bit but I'm wondering about that. How widely known the facility is and how much concern there is in Akron.
I think in Akron, people are just learning what this facility is, and I can't blame you or them for not knowing, because again, one of the results of minor source permitting is you don't really get public notice. Minor source permits aren't even required to have a comment period in Ohio.
So, there's no public notice in the supposable local paper like there are?
There is, but it wouldn't tell you that this is burning waste, right? There will be a public notice that they've received an application for a minor source permit for a advanced recycling facility, right? Like something like that. So, of course, people didn't know about it. And that's one of the reasons, as a legal community, we need to make sure that the right regulations are applying, so that there is like a robust public participation procedures that happen. But yeah, this flew under everybody's radar. It's still, I'm not sure that the city of Akron still knows what happens at this facility, what the emissions are. And it's in East Akron, which is an area of Akron that's already pretty overburdened with chemical facilities. So there was a chemical facility that caught on fire last year that, frankly, the local group that is kind of organized around getting participation at the comment period, a lot of their time was spent, trying to help with the fallout of that chemical fire as well. So it's a community that's already overburdened with pollution. Yeah, there's a neighborhood close by. I think there's a daycare like right across the street, but it's in a little bit of a business corridor part. So there's a store next door to it where I just saw on public records that they've been complaining about odors from the facility. So workers that work nearby seem to be dealing with some impacts from it. Yeah, it's in East Akron, which is uh, even EPA in their public notice document has noted that they're in like the 90th percentile for environmental burdens. It's a Black community as well. So
Yeah, the Akron has a legacy of didn't they manufacture tires in Akron for a long time?
oh yeah, yeah. The tire companies are still here, not so much manufacturing anymore. But yeah, Akron was really built on its tire manufacturing, which has its own legacy pollution in the area. But it's another thing. It's like that's these communities that historically had to have the industry placed in them, like they just the next thing that comes, that's just where they're going to place, because they already, it's already zoned for it. They're already dealing with it. Nobody wants polluting industries in their communities, and so yeah, East Akron has borne the brunt of the city's polluting facilities.
It's frustrating to me as a layman how much of all these problems seem to boil down to like legal semantics and legalese. I mean, does it frustrate you as an attorney, or is it just something that you're so used to? Like, it's just, it's so annoying to me because I'm not in that world that it's almost like listening to like people argue in Latin, But to you, is it just kind of normal? Does it ever frustrate you?
It definitely can, and it's I think one frustrating thing. So I talk to attorneys all the time, and I read legal documents, and even the agencies and the permit writers, the engineers write in legalese. So if you just read a public notice for a permit in the permit, it's all legalese, even though it's supposed to go out to the public, not just to lawyers. So yeah, it can be, I can see why it can be frustrating. I am very used to it. But when I have to go talk to clients and communities, it is hard to like go straight to layman mode, right? And like just like forget all the stuff that I read in and talk to, other people that work here. And so that I find frustrating is that it's just something I need to be better at. It's not using acronyms, not even like today, just I don't even know that I explained the major source, minor source stuff in the Clean Air Act very well, because it is so, I'm trying to simplify it, but it's not all that simple.
No, I think you do an excellent job. And, we sometimes, we're kind of on we talk once a week sometimes, majority of the time and so you and Megan Hunter both, like, I'm like giving you spiritual hugs now. Like, I'm just so grateful because you can explain things so that I can understand it, because I'm just confused so often. But then I call one of you, or we're together, and it's just like, oh, thank God you can help me understand. And because it is very confusing. But you're saying it's so complex that it's you get it, but to disseminate the information and to explain it, you find difficult. Is that what you're saying, basically?
I'm not. So it depends what it is. I don't always get it, and a lot of times, even I've done this since like 2014 heavily. Even in law school, I was doing a lot of environmental law stuff, working with these statutes and regs, and it seems like everything I work on, there's like a new legal issue that I've never seen before that I have to spend a ton of time figuring out. And so there is a lot that I don't know, even like, especially I would say like going into a new case, I never assume that I know everything. I have a pretty good understanding of the basics of the laws that I work with. And then many specifics because of all the things that I've worked on, but it's a lot. Like I said, I find that the way these public notices are done and the way public outreach is by the agencies to be really flawed from the perspective of speaking to the general public. Because I often see a public notice and read a permit and have to go look up things and research things before I can understand it. I just can't imagine how the public is supposed to. And then another thing that's super frustrating to see is then the agencies, so they ask for comments, and then the agencies will really only respond to comments that have to do with the legal requirements. It's like, we didn't explain the legal requirements. You said anyone can comment on this permit, and then they comment and you don't consider it because it doesn't fall within the legal requirements. So
Like
the whole setup is flawed.
Well, I can't even quite comprehend that. Like, so the legal requirements, like, what does that even mean? Like, so like right now there's a public comments being open for Altera. So what, can you try to give me a scenario of like I could write in and say, I live there. We know this and this and this is released from this facility and they're cancer causing, and my legitimate concerns if I was a resident there, but they're saying they won't even consider it because I didn't do what?
Well, they might consider it. So let's say you say that, it releases these pollutants, they're dangerous, I'm concerned about them. They might consider it and write something like, oh, well, there's standards in there they have to comply with. But what I mean is that, like, for example, this facility, it somehow is creating hazardous waste. And we know that because there's some manifests that show that it stores hazardous waste on site. So imagine if you commented, so this air permit's open, its process that creates the air emissions is creating hazardous waste. So you comment and say, hey, there's no information about the hazardous waste, if it's being stored safely, what's happening to it, really concerned about that. What's going to happen with the hazardous waste? YWPA could write back and say, this is under the air permit laws, hazardous waste is regulated under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. We only evaluate this for air pollution. But I've seen them, like, people have pointed out for other facilities I've worked on, like, hey, they don't have a zoning permit for this, and they already started construction. You don't issue this air permit because they're in violation of the zoning laws. They shouldn't get an air permit. And people would say that's outside of our purview, instead of like explaining anything, like why that's okay, or even if that's okay. It's just that these laws are so difficult to understand already. If you're really claiming you're encouraging public participation, they should be a little more engaged, than sticking to the technical requirements of all these laws in responding to the public.
I'm curious, this is more of a philosophical question for you. What do you think we should do as a nation to fix some of these problems? I know like some other countries have sort of granted the environment a form of personhood as a solution. What do you think, like, you've worked on these cases, you've seen a lot of the problems, like the legal problems that kind of expose us to or open us up to this industry behavior and these toxic pollution sources. What do you think we should be doing differently to solve these issues?
There is a lot, and this is a really crazy time for like environmental law in general, because we just went through 4 years of a Supreme Court imposing, in my opinion, its agenda on environmental laws, and now we have the Trump administration attacking the administrative part of it. So there's just a lot that's kind of changing that we're going to have to fight for just to keep. But the environmental laws and the way this country has handled environmental policy, in my opinion, because you're asking like what I would like to see, has always been flawed in two major ways. You mentioned one of them, and that's just granting rights to the environment, or like some of the states, like Pennsylvania has a constitutional provision that says the state is a trustee of the environment and people have a right to clean air and clean water. Maybe something like that, or like you said, countries just give rights to the environment itself. That would help in a number of ways. It would make for better floor laws, so you couldn't degrade the environment, right? If the environment has rights. Right now, you can degrade the environment to a level that EPA says is okay. And whatever they say is okay is what you can degrade it to. So that it would really help there. It would also help us. So when I say like the Supreme Court is kind of attacked, not just environmental fights, but this applies to a lot of others, but like standing is becoming more and more of an issue. That's just, can you even get into court as a citizen or as an environmental group to make your arguments? Just getting in to make the arguments, not even talking about the merits of did they do the permit right, just being able to be heard in court, the injuries that you have to show, the things that sometimes haven't happened in the future, right? And now courts are becoming more and more strict about, well, if it's speculation, you can't claim an injury. And basically, is anything in the future speculation? Are you always going to talk about speculating? But I think if you gave the environment rights and let people sue on behalf of the environment, that would really help with that. So direct environmental rights, I think, is really important. And then the other one that is just the precautionary principle. Like our laws work so that you have to prove this is going to be harmful in order to get anywhere, right? And it takes, that's a scientific endeavor for a lot of what we do. Like think about climate change, for example. Like it's hard to prove exactly when and what the tipping point is, right, for climate change. And so climate change litigation is going to be unsuccessful in this country probably until that gets resolved. But the precautionary principle would help a lot. And that's just, hey, we know this kind of thing can be harmful. We're going to make sure you prove it's safe before we let you do it.
Oh, so that would shift the onus then.
Right. Right now, we're always, and I say we, as in, like, it could be just people who are being harmed by an environmental issue, people that are concerned about environmental or human health issues in the future. Like we have to show that it is going to be harmful instead of this thing. Generally, we know that it can be harmful. Like there's an old case where people were disposing of these tailings, like these mining tailings in a lake, and it had asbestos in it. And people were drinking out of the lake, and they were drinking water with asbestos in it. And although we knew asbestos, when it gets into your lungs, it's very cancerous. The science hadn't really looked at, well, what if it's in your stomach? Like, what if you're drinking it, ingesting it? And they weren't able to get that activity shut down because they couldn't prove yet that you can get cancer from asbestos in your gut. We know now that you can. And it was the court the system was the problem. Like the court tried. You never see this. The court hired its own expert. Right?
Wow.
There was a big study conducted like during the court proceedings where they did studies on people and mice and everything. And you had the industry's experts saying, no, we don't see any. They don't have to say it's safe. We don't see any evidence that it's causing this harm. And then you had the plaintiff's experts saying like, yeah, this is a problem. We're already seeing some early signs. And then you had the court experts saying like, I could see both sides. And so it just didn't get anywhere. Right. So I think, but if the precautionary principle had been, hey, asbestos is harmful, we know that. We're not going to let people ingest it until we know that method of ingestion is safe because we know that it's harmful. Right. So that would really go a long way if that was installed in our environmental laws and all our laws, our public health laws as well.
We were talking to Dr. Nicole Diesel, and how did she say it? I mean, as a researcher, or even concerned community members, we have to prove that it's unsafe. after the fact, like after these facilities are built in your communities, it's, we have to prove that it's causing harm versus what you're saying is they should have to prove that it's safe before they're issued a permit to operate, right?
Well, we talk a lot about like injection wells, Jill, because oil and gas, maybe we'll have a whole podcast about the oil and gas waste problem at some point. You should have Megan on for that for sure. But I'm always reminded of this is true in a lot of areas, but one that I just find so frustrating is tying injection wells or fracking to earthquakes, right? So for the longest time, the industry would say there's no evidence that this causes earthquakes. Like maybe some minimal seismic activity, but not earthquakes. Then like Oklahoma is getting a ton of earthquakes, and they started linking them to earthquakes to injection wells in Ohio. And again, this is very hard. This all happens deep under the ground. Like the science takes time to catch up. No precautionary principle. It's like, well, in theory, this can cause earthquakes, but we can't prove that it will, right? So we just let it happen. So they went from, well, this process doesn't cause earthquakes. There's no evidence that it causes earthquakes. And now that they're getting earthquakes from it, some agencies and the industry certainly is now saying, well, earthquakes aren't bad. So like that's where we are now, is earthquakes aren't bad. So it's just the goalposts just keep moving.
Yeah, one of the issues that I've, speaking about sort of moving the goalposts and proving harm, one of the issues that has always come up in my head is this idea that the more toxins that exist in an environment, the harder it has to be able to link them to specific causes. And so legally, without that precautionary, what would you call it? That precautionary principle. So without that precautionary principle, how do you even go about linkage in like a lawsuit, like in litigation? If you have a community that's been harmed, but there's multiple sources of toxins, what's that process like as an attorney?
Yeah. So I've done, not where I work now, but I've done tort litigation before in situations like that. And you need to show where it came from. So you have to, and it's expert. So some testimony can't even be given in court if it is, if a court determines that this is really something only an expert can speak to with reliability. And this is one of those cases, like where did these pollutants come from when you have a bunch of sources? You need to have an expert be able to prove it. And to do that, the expert needs the facts. So they need emissions, they will oftentimes have to model. So, but based on modeling and emissions, an expert can potentially say, it's with the reasonable degree of scientific certainty that these pollutants came from this facility. And sometimes they're markers. So, with some facilities that emit like ethylene oxide, for example, that's only coming from like this one place, right? So if you're getting readings of that on your property, or if your medical issue is tied to that, it's easier to link. But oftentimes it is really hard to, and the companies will do that. They'll point to each other and say, could have been them, could have been them. No,
Right.
Certainly wasn't me.
So if you have a situation, like if you have a regulatory environment that's not making companies, or that doesn't have agencies really actively monitoring, does that become exponentially more difficult? Because then you don't have like the data to pull from?
Absolutely. You need the data. And people oftentimes have to get the data. So that was true for, like I did tort cases around compressor stations before, and you have to get the data. So you got to do the monitoring. And sometimes you can get the data through. So if you make a complaint to an agency, so if you see an odor, you see smoke, anytime you're seeing an emissions facility, unless it's like steam, if you see like black smoke, that is, I'm sure they're violating their permit. And so you can call the agency, and sometimes the agency will come do an inspection, take its own readings, and you can use that data. So there are ways you can get it without an expert, but if the agency isn't gonna get that data for you, yeah, you just got to get it yourself. And that can either be too expensive. It might be more expensive than what you would get out of the lawsuit, so it wouldn't be worth it in that sense. But yeah, it is a big problem. And another big flaw in just environmental permitting in general is you talk about people being exposed to different sources of pollution. Well, when you permit a new source of pollution, there's no requirement to look at the cumulative impacts. By that, I mean, like, maybe this pollutant is safe at this level on its own, but what about when it interacts with these other pollutants? What happens when that, you know? And so without that, you're not really getting, even if they do follow strictly what they have to do to get a permit, even if they have to do modeling, even if they have to look at every potential pollutant they emit, you're not really getting a sense of, is it really safe unless you do that cumulative impacts analysis. And that's another flaw in our environmental laws. And there was more and more happening basically under environmental justice requirements. Some communities were successful at getting cumulative impacts analysis, but that seems to be going away more and more under the current administration. So that's an area that's always needed improvement, and we're going to have to fight to get it back.
And so this cumulative impact, and if, I happy to hear in the environmental justice work, community engagement and efforts is helping that, but the cumulative impact, realistically, as far as legislation goes, that's never going to come into play.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, certainly not under this Congress and this president, but I think it's a push that people can make. I mean, I think it was called the Environmental Justice for All Act that would have required cumulative impacts analysis in the statute. I mean, that would be great. But I would also like to see if we get a environmentally friendly EPA back at some point, them to do more rulemakings to require cumulative impact analysis and make the states do it and things like that. Yeah, it can be done. It's not an unreasonable ask.
Well, they just the current EPA just rolled back, I think, 31 like foundational environmental protections. I'm in the process of reading through them all. But so at the federal level, when you get an administration in that through executive order or otherwise is rolling back a lot of these things, what does that mean long term? And what does that mean at the state level? Does that mean that these protections are just gone forever? Or can they come, is it like if you had a regulation, for example, that took 20 years to build and one administration comes and rolls it back, is it gone? Are we back to zero, or what's?
Are we set 20 years back, or can it just be reinstated when the new administration gets in?
So if they're successful in getting rid of it, it can be recreated, right? And it can even be improved. So that's that. If there is success in rolling back a lot of regulations, I hope the pendulum swings the other way and we get them back as strong as they originally were needed to be, because a lot of these regulations are flawed, needed even as is, but flawed. But to your point about the time and process that created them, there's supposed to be a process for revoking them. And so if the Trump administration, I'm sure we know plans to try to roll back a lot of regulations, including environmental regulations. And if they don't go through the proper process, or if they do it and don't, they also have to be justified in removing a regulation. You have to provide some basis for your regulation, and you can argue that in court that they didn't provide enough reasoning compared to the reasoning that went into creating the regulation. So first of all, those, just because they try to roll back doesn't mean they'll be successful in doing so. We saw it with the last Trump administration. I don't think they didn't go as gung-ho as they're going now, but they certainly did a lot of rollbacks, and many of them were stopped, through court fights. And then, yeah, the next administration can propose their own regulations when they come back in. So
I was just going to say Earthjustice, as it can take credit for helping, keep those, helping stopping the rollbacks, right? Than the last time. And so I'm just saying I'm really glad to know that y'all are out there doing the good work. And I think I might be a little bit numb right now to, it's just like boom, boom. It feels like we're just getting sucker punched and then smacked in the face and then your knees knocked out from under you. And I'm sun level, right? Like I'm still enjoying my life and it's beautiful spring in Appalachia and I love it. But like, as an attorney, how do you feel? I mean, can you relate to what I just said?
yeah, well, the thing is that there's a lot happening, and not all of it's environmental. So it's just like as a human, it's a lot to see. It just feels like a big shift in the way the executive has been run, right? I mean, we had Trump before, and it wasn't quite like this at all. So yeah, it's been a lot just to process everything. But yeah, as far as the environmental stuff, and I think a lot of environmental organizations we did go through Trump 1. We're pretty set up to engage in fights, right? And so I think the environmental organizations really support each other. So I feel pretty supported and okay there. Not that I'm not worried. I'm certainly worried about what's happening. But yeah, I just think it's everything that's just kind of a lot. And you're right. It's like we just got through winter. And so there's just a natural like up in mood now that like sun comes out. I can go hike the parks around here again and things like that. So yeah, I just feel all of it though,
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people who are not plugged in, who are not attorneys, who are not working in environmental issues, and they're just sort of living their life, and they're getting all their information from media, whether it's legacy media or like hyperbolic media, like alternative media. I think there's a real sense of fear right now for a lot of people. And I just am curious if that is like should people take a step back and realize that there are processes for this? Like just because it's an executive order doesn't mean it's a done deal. And there are people fighting every day to push back on things that are wrong on both sides of the fence. I don't want to be too partisan here, but like, there are processes in place that kind of, I think in the media environment, it feels like it's like really panicky, but in reality, it's a little slower, right?
Yeah, so that is one thing that there's supposed to be a process. I think what we're seeing is this administration trying to avoid process, which again, I think is a difference from the last time that is a little worrisome. But I think just taking a step back, I think most people, and I think you probably saw this in the last election, not that I'm a pollster or anything, but most people they want a comfortable life. Like they want to go to work. They want their wages to reflect like the price of goods, right? They want to feel like they are comfortable economically. They want to be able to work a short enough day that they can pick their kids up from daycare. You know what I mean? It's just like, so I think there's a sense that like all this stuff happening at the federal level through executive orders, like I can see why it's like, I just have other stuff going on, like more immediate than this thing that might touch me from some consequence in the future. Like with the tariffs, I think a lot of people are very like wait and see on that, right? But also taking a step back, like Jill, to your point earlier, and as far as like, am I worried or like how am I feeling about this fight? Our region in particular, and this doing this work, we even through other administrations, it's not like it's been good here. It's not like we felt like the EPA has supported us, you
Right.
know? And even with the hydrogen hubs that were proposed under the IRA, they even said, like, we're sorry, but the same communities that have borne the burdens before, we're asking you to do it again.
Yeah.
And it's like, nobody asked us.
Exactly.
And so it just feels like it's a more intense, it's a lot of like stopping more, stopping more probably, but it's not, it just feels like we're just still in the fight, you know? Not that, I don't want to act like not a lot has changed, but it's not like we weren't having to fight a lot under other administrations. These are the Ohio River Valley and the Gulf South in particular. They were getting hammered by the last administration too.
And you always make that point.
I make that point constantly. We constantly get comments on our videos and social media about if someone is being impacted negatively by fracking. There's kind of this implication that like, oh, well, you must have voted for Trump, you deserve it. But it's like, hey, you know, fracking has been surging under every administration back all the way to Obama. You know. So I
debates, they argue about who's more pro fracking.
That was it for me. I saw that. I'm like, this is just, doesn't matter.
Where is this coming from? How many people must be watching, like in like some Western state, like what's frack? What are they talking? Why don't we just spend 20 minutes on this thing I know nothing about? You know?
Exactly.
It's because the oil and gas industry is okay with both parties, and both parties are okay with it. And the places that bear the burden of it are just going to bear it. They're going to have to fight it under each administration. So yeah, that really hasn't changed. That's continues. I mean, Trump kept the pieces of the IRA in our regions because they were promoting oil and gas development, right? But he didn't make that. That was Biden that did that.
Well, and you're my good friend. You know, we've been connected for a long time, and I'm trying to remember the last time you visited me here. And so we've got this incredible new, what do you call it? Camcorder, which sounds like old school. But I would love sometime for you to come down and like, we'll take you out and we can do a little filming and show you some of the things that are happening, what I say is we're going to see the devastation, but there's also lots of lovely things to see, and just being together will be great. So, and until that can happen, we might want you to come and do this Zoom thing sooner than later again, as more and more concerns and issues comes up, because I learned so much from this. And thank you so much, James. Forever appreciate and love you.
Yeah, it would be great to be there in person. And I think in June, I'm going to have time freed up. It's just a really, really busy period, to the point where it's like, what is it, an hour and a half drive? I couldn't lose a whole day of work.
No, I'm not, and I completely understand. We need you in your house doing your work, especially with these, public comments and all the things coming up. So yeah, I'm just grateful. Thank God for technology for moments like this. So you've been here and this was perfect. And, but when it's the right time, we're going to have some adventures together. Yep.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I learned a lot. I'm curious if you have anything else, any closing remark for the audience in terms of like how people can better get involved in these issues? Yeah,
I would get involved with groups like Jill's, and there's statewide environmental organizations, but also local groups. So yeah, I would just reach out to them and see how you can get involved. A lot of these organizations are really good at keeping up on the issues, and it's just not something. It's really hard to like just do yourself.
Thank you so much, James, and wishing you guidance and protection, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really good to talk to you. We got to do it in person very soon.
Peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Exposure. We are a grassroots, self-published show, and your support is invaluable. You can support our work directly at exposurestudios.org or by simply liking, commenting, and sharing these videos. And don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up to date on this constantly evolving topic and catch new shows as they drop. Exposure is hosted and produced by the founder of the Ohio Valley Allies, Jill Hunkler. Our co-host, executive producer, and creative director is Stuart Day. Our associate producer and director of operations is Wea Slater. Our video editor and videographer is Grant Newman. And our theme song was created by Spencer Day. Listen to Exposure on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram for more content. Find out how you can take action at the community level or support our work through donations by visiting our website. This show only exists because of the generosity and the commitment of community members just like you. See you next time.